Hey guys, what's going on? I'm John Malecki, and in this video, I'm going to show you how I built this modern concrete coffee table. Check it out. So this project was a bit of a learning curve. I wanted to practice some concrete work for a client job coming up, so I started out with your standard pouring technique, and you'll see that changes down the line. This requires a melamine mold, which you see me breaking down here, and my first mistake was using brad nails to assemble the form. I thought this would be a quicker way to do it, but turned out that it just tears things to pieces, and it was super incorrect. And then my second mistake is I didn't countersink any of the screws I used after the brad nail. I wipe out the form and cut some wire mesh for reinforcement, and then caulk all the corners and clean them up with a caulking tool. I then go ahead and move on to mixing up some concrete. Here I'm using Quikrete 5000, which has some rocks in it, as you can see. I fill up the form and start pressing it into the corners until it's about a ½ inch thick throughout the entire mold. I then add the wire mesh and finish filling the mold. I screed it flat on the bottom and let it dry for about 5 days. Here I'm just vibrating out the bubbles the best that I can. I used a recip saw, a sander, and a hammer to get those out. So unfortunately, as I'm working on the top, I realize there's a bow in the bottom of it and it's not gonna sit flat on the frame that I made for it, as well as there's a lot of pitting and pock marks in the top that really came out when I put the wax on it. So this is my first concrete project. I'm gonna get back into another one because I do have leftover melamine. I'll make another mold, I'll get one put together, and we'll finish this thing up and get this project out the door. Let's go. So for round 2, I deconstruct the old mold, as you can see here, so I can use the bottom again, and then I reattach some sides that I freshly cut. I countersink and screw these one in properly this time with no brad nails. I then use some paste wax, which is a trick I learned from Mike at Modustrial Maker, and then I apply the caulk. The wax helps release the caulk after I use this cool little fondant tool trick that Mike has on his channel, and I'll link to that in my description. I then mix up some Portland cement and some fine sand this time in order to use a hopper sprayer. Here you can see I have this Harbor Freight texture spray gun that hooks up to my airline, and I spray the form until it's about a ½ inch thick throughout the entire form. Once the form is filled, I add some shredded fiberglass to the cement mix and some acrylic hardener. I mix that up until it's about the consistency of what you can make a patty. I pack that into the mold over the ½ inch until the mold's completely full. You want it to be the consistency in which you're able to play with it. Here it was a little bit thin in this part, but it ended up working out fine. I then continue to fill the mold and I screed the bottom to as flat as I can get it. I'll cover the mold with some plastic or a tarp, and I let this one sit for 2 days. So this is great news. This top looks much better. There's not even anywhere close to as many voids. I'm gonna hit it with the slurry coat just because I'm stupid and left some stuff on top of the face of the melamine before I poured, and I stuck my fingers through that coat on the when I sprayed it. So a little bit of a slurry coat should be able to get this thing nice and smooth and get it done. I fill some of the holes left with a slurry coat, which is just acrylic and Portland cement. I then sand off the rough parts of the slurry coat by hand first with some 80 grit on a block, and then jump to my random orbit sander with 150 grit and work all the way up to 400. So after the top is prepped, I move on to making the base. I'm just using 1 inch square tubing for this, and super simple design and construction. I cut all the parts for the base first, and then I chamfer all of the corners that will be used in the joints for the welds. You want the welds to penetrate somewhere, so that's why you chamfer the corners. I then go ahead on my welding table and lay out what will be the top of the frame. Because the welding table's flat, I'm able to reference that and get all of my angles nice and square. I first tack in all of the legs, which you'll see here in a second, and then I add all of the cross members and stretchers that will make the frame look like a complete box. Make sure that you tack weld all of the frame together first,
That way, if it's out of square or there's any issues, it's much easier to fix. Here you see I'm checking for square, and then I'll go in and finish all of the welds. All of the exposed welds on the outside will get ground down to flush, and then I use an inside corner abrasive flap disc pad in order to get the inside welds nice and pretty. I'll take a Scotch-Brite pad as you saw and scuff the surface, and then wipe it down with acetone and spray it with a self-etching primer. After the primer goes on, I finish it up with a coat of matte black enamel. Once the base is dry, I go ahead and add 2 coats of Kills concrete sealer to the bottom of the table and the top. The top, I take my time and use nice long strokes so there's no streaking in the top once it's finished. And after that, this table's wrapped. Off camera, after I got this in its final home, I do attach the top with some construction adhesive so it doesn't move when it's in place.
Thank you guys so much for checking out this build. As you saw, I had a big screw up in the middle of it, but I ended up being able to fix it with a little bit of research. I want to send a thank you out there to my buddy Joy Bigham for helping me out with that. The GFRC stuff is a complex world of creation, and I was glad to be able to pick the brain of a pro. Speaking of pros, I want to thank my sponsor for this build, Timberland Pro. Timberland Pro is my go-to for workwear, especially with boots. I've been wearing them for years. Absolutely love them. If you want to see more of what I wear from Timberland Pro, check out the link in the description below. And when you support my sponsors, you support me, and I put more content out for you guys. So thank you guys one more time for tuning in. Go punch your next project in the face, and I'll see you in the next video.